there's a lot to fight for. There's a load of life, and there's a lot of people looking to churches like ourselves because good things are happening. But we also have a wider responsibility to keep the church moored to the historical gospel, which sounds all very discouraging in some ways, doesn't it? But what I've been really struck by is this sense that actually there's something new that's coming. I believe we are on the edge of something, that God is on the move. I have seen more unity amongst believers across denominations than I've ever known during my lifetime. I've seen more prayer movements starting and catching and really taking off, like Thy Kingdom Come, than I can remember at any point in my lifetime. And I've got to believe that where God's people are one and they are crying out to Him, that those cries are not going to go unanswered by heaven. And, we are overdue for a revival in this land. Historically, the picture has never been one of inexorable decline. The picture has always been decline, followed by God's people call out to Him and He does something. And it's happened numerous times in the history of this land, as it has around the world in other countries as well. So we haven't seen a revival on the mainland since 1904. We haven't seen a revival in any part of the British Isles since 1948, but we're overdue, and God's people are praying, and I believe that we're going to see the Lord start to move. The last time we had a decade called the 20s, it was the Roaring 20s. My sense is that this is a decade in which God is not going to let His church be humiliated, but the lion is going to roar. It's going to be the decade of the roaring lion, and God is going to show that it's not over and the church isn't finished. Came across this little verse, end of the Song of Songs, and it's an interesting little verse. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Song of Songs is a hymn to human love, but it's also at another level an allegory of God's relationship with His church. And this is this sense throughout the Old Testament that when times are hard, God's people go off into exile or they go off into wilderness. And this is a picture that says God brings that person back out of the wilderness as she leans into Him. I think that's the way forward. So we need to recognize that we're in wilderness, we're in exile, that the church doesn't have the privileged position that we often think historically has or should have. And, when the laws start to get fixed against us, we stamp our feet. We need to recognize we're not in that place anymore. But the way to come out of the wilderness is to lean on the beloved, is intimacy and encounter. I heard someone say it's interesting that through Scripture that the more in exile God's people are, the more secular the culture around them, the more supernatural the story that gets told. When it gets darker, when it gets less Christian, the more supernatural the stories suddenly become. And so we need to pray for that.